Being a doctor can really suck sometimes. From night shifts and unpaid overtime to dealing with death and pandemics. Within the first few months of working, I really internalized that my job as a doctor was a lot different to most other jobs that my friends had. So I thought I'd tell you about some of the downsides of being a doctor. Firstly, let me tell you about working with crappy people. Now, most of the people you work with in a hospital are genuinely nice people, but sooner or later you run into problematic ones. And as someone who had just started working, I found it crazy that people could be so rude to colleagues who had literally only been there for a couple of weeks. Whether it was in person or on the phone, there were times where I was shouted at, belittled and patronized, all for trying to do my job. And it really sucks because usually these people have been working there longer than you. That means, one, others might downplay or brush it off as if, he or she has always been that way. And two, the person you have to complain to might be close with the person you have a problem with. What that means is that you just have to swallow your pride, accept what's happened, and move on. You can't argue or be rude back just because there's a power dynamic that will often work in their favor. Not that I recommend doing that anyway. And regardless of whether or not you complain, that person is likely to carry on working there regardless. So you have to still see their face and interact with them in the near future. Overall, it's just not a nice experience. Which brings me on to another experience which I'm not too fond of, dealing with death. The first few deaths I had to verify were all on my night shifts, which basically involves doing a quick medical exam to confirm that they are indeed dead. Because we're responsible for a lot more patients at night than we are during the day, the chances of us encountering death is a lot higher at night. And whether the patient's family are already by the bedside or we have to call them in, for me it's always felt like a very surreal experience. Even though in some situations these interactions were the first time I had seen that specific patient, I would just think about how these people had lived unique entire lives which had all just abruptly come to an end. Part of you feels quite disconnected from the whole experience because you don't know much about them, but the other half of you feels strangely engulfed by this moment in time where you're privileged enough to be trusted to enter such a private and emotional setting for the families. I can honestly say that no two experiences have ever felt the same. Some go smoothly on my end, and other times I can't find the words to console a grieving family. And one patient who I'll never forget was a lady who was admitted on my ward where I worked during most days. She had a lot of medical conditions and her health was slowly but surely deteriorating. And so it was the first time that I'd literally seen someone's entire journey from entering the hospital, battling multiple conditions, laughing with all her children beside her, having her good days and bad days, but eventually drift away. Towards the end of her stay, even her family recognized me as one of the doctors who had spent a lot of the last weeks looking after her. So it was a roller coaster of emotions on the day that she passed. I remember being a little slow that day just because it kept popping up in my mind every now and again throughout the day. I didn't expect it to affect me as much as it did. You don't get training in medical school to deal with these things the same way they pan out in real life. You just sort of have to figure it out as you go and keep moving. But not every day the sad one. The majority are actually overwhelmingly positive. One of my favourite things about work are the days I receive a simple compliment. Not some grand action where somebody shows their appreciation for something I did, just a simple compliment. A consultant taking a moment to tell me that it was a pleasure to work with me that day. Or a patient who enjoyed being under my care enough to say, "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" One of my favourite moments happened when I spent almost an entire day speaking to a specialist doctor from another hospital to seek advice for one of the children that I was looking after. There was a lot of back and forth conversations until the end of the day where she actually called my ward to thank me and one of my colleagues had answered the phone. She said she was surprised to find out that I was a junior when in fact she thought I was several years further in my training. She even took the time to email me and repeat the message personally, thanking me for my hard work over the day. What I loved about that most wasn't even the compliment itself, but the fact that somebody would take the time out of their day to say something nice to someone they barely even knew. So yeah, some of my friends have jobs which are less stressful, pay better and have more sociable hours, but some of the best things about being a doctor can't be measured. The stories that you come home with every day, the relationships that you build between your team, and the feeling that you get from helping people day in, day out. I don't think there are many jobs that can compare. Being a doctor has its ups and downs, yes. But if you're watching this and you hope to become one day, just know that the highs are worth the lows, and it's an incredible privilege just to experience it all. Thank you for watching, and I'd really appreciate if you could take a second to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. And if you'd like to hear more about the compliment story, then I've wrote an entire article about it as part of my weekly motivational newsletter, Life Lemons, which I'll leave a link for below. Otherwise, you can see another video here, and I will see you next week.